hope you enjoy this story. Let's begin. The warm glow of sunset painted the sky as I pulled into my driveway, exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders. The medical conference had been a resounding success, my presentation on the revolutionary surgical technique drawing praise from colleagues I'd admired for years. But now all I wanted was to surprise Allison, my wife of 8 years, with an early return home. I fumbled with my keys, the house eerily quiet as I stepped inside. "Allison," I called out, my voice echoing through the empty halls. No response. Frowning, I made my way upstairs, the plush carpet muffling my footsteps. As I neared our bedroom, I heard it. Muffled voices, punctuated by a sound that made my blood run cold. Laughter. A man's laughter. My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob, a part of me screaming to turn back, to pretend I'd heard nothing. But I couldn't. I had to know. The door creaked open, and my world shattered. Allison, my beautiful, brilliant wife, sat on our bed, her face illuminated by the glow of her laptop screen. She was barely dressed, a flimsy nightgown leaving little to the imagination. And on that screen, grinning like a Cheshire cat, was a face I knew all too well. Right. The man whose life I'd saved, whose inoperable brain tumor I'd removed just 2 years ago. They didn't notice me at first, too caught up in their own little world. I stood there frozen as bile rose in my throat. How long had this been going on? How many times had she lain in our bed, whispering sweet nothings to another man while I worked tirelessly to save lives? "So I'm just a paycheck to you?" The words tumbled from my lips before I could stop them, dripping with venom and hurt. Allison's head snapped up, her eyes widening in shock before narrowing with cruel amusement. "Bingo," she laughed, the sound like shards of glass in my ears. 8 years of playing the loving wife. What a joke. Ryan's face filled the screen, his smug grin making my fists clench. "Yeah, a loser," he sneered. "Can't handle a real woman? Get lost." Something snapped inside me. In 3 long strides, I crossed the room, snatching Allison's phone from the nightstand. With a roar of rage, I hurled it against the wall, watching with satisfaction as it shattered into 1,000 pieces. Allison screamed, scrambling off the bed, but I was faster. My fingers dug into her arm as I dragged her towards the stairs, her protests falling on deaf ears. She stumbled, nearly falling, but I didn't slow down. The front door loomed before us, and with one powerful shove, I sent her sprawling onto the street, her flimsy robe doing little to preserve her modesty. "You belong to the streets," I growled, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. The door slammed shut with a finality that shook the house. Through the wood, I heard her muffled voice, dripping with malice. "You'll regret this, Ethan. I'll make you pay." I slumped against the door, my legs giving out as the adrenaline drained from my body. The house felt cavernous, echoing with the ghosts of happier times. How had it come to this? 8 years of marriage, of building a life together, reduced to ashes in a matter of minutes. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a series of texts from Allison flooding the screen. Threats, pleas, promises of revenge. I turned it off, unable to bear the sight of her name. The silence pressed in around me, suffocating in its intensity. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone again, scrolling through my contacts until I found the one person I knew I could trust. James. My finger hovered over his name for a moment before I hit call, praying he'd answer. "Ethan." James's voice crackled through the speaker, concern evident even through the tinny sound. "What's wrong, man? I thought you were still at the conference. I need you." I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. "Can you come over? And bring a bottle of scotch. A big one." There was a pause, then a rustle of movement. "I'm on my way." "Hang tight, buddy." The call disconnected, leaving me alone with my thoughts once more. I dragged myself to the living room, collapsing onto the couch. Family photos lined the walls, mocking me with their frozen smiles and false promises of happily ever after. How long had Allison been lying to me? How many nights had she spent in another man's arms while I worked tirelessly to save lives? The irony of it all wasn't lost on me. I dedicated my life to healing others, but I couldn't see the cancer growing in my own marriage. Time seemed to stretch and warp as I waited for James. Each tick of the clock was a reminder of the life I'd lost, the future that had been stolen from me. When the doorbell finally rang, I nearly jumped out of my skin. James stood on the doorstep, a bottle of expensive scotch in one hand and concern etched across his face. One look at me, and he knew. Without a word, he stepped inside, pulling me into a tight hug. "Jesus, Ethan," he muttered as he released me. "What the hell happened?" I led him to the living room, collapsing back onto the couch as he poured us each a generous measure of scotch. The amber liquid burned as it went down, a welcome distraction from the pain gnawing at my chest. "Allison," I finally managed to say, my voice hoarse. She's been cheating on me." James's sharp intake of breath was the only sound in the room. I looked up, meeting his eyes, and saw a mix of shock and something else. "Guilt?" "How long?" he asked quietly, swirling the scotch in his glass. I shook my head, laughing bitterly. "Does it matter?" "Long enough." But that's not even the worst part. I took another gulp of scotch, relishing the burn. "It's Ryan. You remember him. The guy with the inoperable tumor I removed 2 years ago." James's face paled. "Shit, Ethan. That's fucked up." "Yeah," I agreed, draining my glass. "Pretty fucked up." We sat in silence for a while, James refilling our glasses whenever they emptied. The alcohol dulled the edges of my pain, but couldn't erase the image of Allison and Ryan burned into my mind. "I should have said something," James finally said, his words slightly slurred. At my questioning look, he continued, "I had suspicions about Allison, but I didn't want to hurt you without proof. The admission should have angered me, but I was too numb to feel much of anything." "Doesn't matter now," I muttered. "It's over." I threw her out. James's eyebrows shot up. "You what?" I recounted the events of the evening, watching as James's expression shifted from shock to grudging admiration. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Damn, Ethan. Remind me never to piss you off." He paused, his brow furrowing. "But what are you going to do now?" Allison's not the type to go quietly. The scotch had loosened my tongue, and before I could stop myself, I blurted out, "I could report Ryan to the medical board. Ethical violations. He was my patient, for Christ's sake." James's hand on my arm stopped me. "Whoa, slow down there, buddy. Think about this. You report Ryan, and Allison's going to retaliate. She could make up all sorts of shit about you. And in this climate, it could tank your career." The truth of his words sobered me slightly. I slumped back, the fight draining out of me. "Then what am I supposed to do, James? Just let them get away with it." James squeezed my shoulder, his voice gentle but firm. "You focus on you, Ethan. You're one of the best damn surgeons I know. Don't let Allison's bullshit derail your life. You've got that new technique you've been working on, right? Throw yourself into that. Show the world what you're capable of." His words stirred something in me, a spark of the passion that had driven me to become a neurosurgeon in the first place. I nodded slowly, the beginnings of a plan forming in my alcohol-addled mind. "You're right," I said, my voice stronger than it had been all night. "I'm not going to let her destroy everything I've worked for." James grinned, raising his glass in a toast. "That's the spirit. To new beginnings and kicking ass in the oar." We clinked glasses, the sound ringing out in the quiet house. As I drank, I made a silent vow to myself. Allison might have betrayed me, but I wouldn't let her betrayal define me. I was Dr. Ethan Sawyer, and I had lives to save. The rest of the night passed in a blur of scotch and conversation. James, true to his nature as my best friend, listened as I alternated between raging at Allison's betrayal and mourning the life we'd built together. By the time the first rays of sunlight began to creep through the windows, I felt wrung out but somehow lighter. James crashed on the couch, his snores filling the living room as I stumbled up to the guest bedroom. I couldn't bear to sleep in the bed I'd shared with Allison, not with a memory of what I'd witnessed still fresh in my mind. As I collapsed onto the unfamiliar mattress, my phone buzzed insistently. Bleary-eyed, I fumbled for it, my heart sinking as I saw the notifications flooding the screen. Missed calls and text messages, all from Allison. With trembling fingers, I opened the texts, each one like a dagger to my chest. "You can't do this to me, Ethan. I'll ruin you. Give me what I'm owed, or I'll tell everyone what a monster you really are. You think you can just throw me away?" I made you, and I can destroy you just as easily. The threats continued, each more vicious than the last. I read them all, my jaw clenching tighter with each swipe of my finger. By the time I reached the end, any lingering doubts about my decision had vanished. The woman who had written these messages wasn't the Allison I had loved. She was a stranger, cruel and calculating. I turned off my phone, tossing it onto the nightstand. As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, one thought echoed through my mind. I would not let Allison win. I would show her and the world exactly what Dr. Ethan Sawyer was capable of. The harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor seemed brighter than usual as I strode through the familiar halls. Despite the pounding headache, a remnant of last night's scotch-fueled commiseration with James, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. Nurses and orderlies nodded respectfully as I passed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that their eyes lingered a bit too long. Had Allison already started spreading her poison? I squared my shoulders, refusing to let paranoia get the best of me. I had work to do. As I rounded the corner towards my office, a familiar voice called out, "Dr. Sawyer, do you have a moment?" I turned to see Dr. Layla Patel hurrying towards me, a thick file clutched to her chest. Layla was one of the brightest neurologists I'd ever worked with, her keen mind and steady hands a perfect complement to my more aggressive surgical style. "Of course, Dr. Patel," I replied, forcing a smile. "What can I do for you?" Layla's dark eyes sparkled with excitement as she fell into step beside me. "I've got a case I think you'll want to see." Young woman, 28 years old, presenting with a rare neurological condition. The imaging is, well, you have to see it for yourself. Intrigued despite my emotional turmoil, I ushered Layla into my office. As she spread the scans across my desk, my personal problems faded to the background. The images before me were unlike anything I'd seen in my career. "My God," I muttered, leaning in for a closer look. "Is that?" Layla nodded. "A arteriovenous malformation, intertwined with a grade 3 astrocytoma. It's like nothing I've ever seen before. Every surgeon who's looked at it has declared it inoperable." I traced the complex web of blood vessels with my finger, my mind already racing with possibilities. "But you don't agree," I said. It wasn't a question. A small smile played at the corners of Layla's mouth. "I remembered your presentation at the conference. That new technique you've been developing. I think it might be our patient's only hope." The conference. Had it really only been 2 days ago? It felt like a lifetime. I pushed the thought aside, focusing on the challenge before me. "Tell me everything," I said, pulling up a chair. "Start from the beginning." For the next hour, Layla and I pored over Sarah's case. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that this was the perfect opportunity to prove the effectiveness of my new method. It was risky, certainly, but the potential rewards were immeasurable. As we discussed potential approaches, a commotion in the hallway caught my attention. Raised voices drifted through the closed door, one of them achingly familiar. "Allison." "I don't care if he's in a meeting," her shrill voice carried clearly. "I'm his wife, and I demand to see him." I exchanged a glance with Layla, whose eyes had widened in surprise. "I should." I began, but she was already shaking her head. "I'll handle this," she said firmly, standing up. "You focus on Sarah's case. We need you at your best for this." Before I could protest, Layla had slipped out of the office, closing the door firmly behind her. I strained to hear what was happening, but the voices quickly faded, Layla no doubt steering Allison away from my office. I slumped back in my chair, the brief respite from my personal drama shattered. What was Allison playing at, coming to the hospital like this? My phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out to find a message from James. "Heads up, buddy. Allison's on the warpath. She's been calling around, telling anyone who'll listen that you're unstable and unfit to operate. Watch your back." My blood ran cold as I read the message. So this was her game. Unable to hurt me directly, she was going after the one thing that mattered most to me, my career. A knock at the door jolted me from my dark thoughts. "Dr. Sawyer." It was Angela, one of the senior nurses. "The board is requesting your presence in the conference room." Immediately, I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Thank you, Angela. I'll be right there." As I made my way to the conference room, I could feel the weight of curious stares following me. Whispers seemed to echo from every corner, snippets of conversation reaching my ears. Did you hear? His wife, can you believe it? Not sure he should be operating. I gritted my teeth, forcing myself to walk tall. Let them talk. I knew who I was and what I was capable of. No amount of gossip could change that. The conference room fell silent as I entered, the board members eyeing me with a mix of concern and suspicion. Dr. Harrison, the chief of surgery, spoke first. Dr. Sawyer, thank you for joining us on such short notice. Please have a seat. I settled into the chair at the end of the table, my back straight, my expression neutral. Of course, Dr. Harrison. How can I help you? Dr. Harrison cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. Ethan, we've received some concerning reports about your personal life. Normally, we wouldn't involve ourselves in such matters, but given the high-risk nature of the surgery you're proposing, you're wondering if I'm fit to operate. I finished for him, my voice steady. A murmur ran through the room. Dr. Harrison leaned forward, his fingers steepled on the table. We have to consider the potential risks, Ethan. This surgery you're proposing is already high risk. If there's any chance your personal situation might affect your performance, I cut him off, my voice level but firm. My personal life has no bearing on my abilities as a surgeon. In fact, I'd argue that this case is exactly what I need right now. A chance to focus on what truly matters, saving lives. Dr. Patel, who had been standing quietly by the door, stepped forward. If I may, Dr. Harrison, I've been working closely with Dr. Sawyer on this case. His approach is innovative, yes, but it's also our patient's best hope. I've never seen him more focused or determined. From the other end of the table, James spoke up. I can vouch for Ethan's state of mind. He's handling a difficult situation with remarkable poise. If anything, it's made him more committed to his work, not less. I felt a surge of gratitude from my colleagues' support. The board members exchanged glances, their expressions softening slightly. Dr. Harrison sighed, rubbing his temples. Ethan, you understand our position. This surgery carries significant risks. If something were to go wrong, nothing will go wrong, I said, my voice ringing with conviction. I've spent years developing this technique. Sarah's case is complex, yes, but it's also the perfect opportunity to demonstrate its effectiveness. I staked my reputation on its success. A heavy silence fell over the room. I could see the board members weighing their options, the potential rewards against the risks. Finally, Dr. Harrison nodded. Very well, Dr. Sawyer. You have our approval to proceed with the surgery. But understand this, we'll be monitoring the situation closely. Any sign that your personal issues are affecting your work, and we'll be forced to reconsider. I stood, relief and determination coursing through me. Thank you for your trust. I won't let you down. As I left the conference room, Layla fell into step beside me. That was impressive, she said quietly. Are you sure you're okay with this? It's a lot of pressure. I turned to her, a smile on my face. Pressure is what I do best, Dr. Patel. Now let's go save Sarah's life. The next few days passed in a blur of preparation. I threw myself into Sarah's case with a single-minded focus that left no room for thoughts of Allison or her betrayal. Every spare moment was spent reviewing scans, refining my approach, and running simulations. Layla proved to be an invaluable partner, her keen mind catching details I might have missed in my determination. We worked late into the night, hunched over light boxes and computer screens, debating the best way to navigate the treacherous landscape of Sarah's brain. It was during one of these late-night sessions that I overheard them. Two nurses, their voices carrying from the break room down the hall. Did you hear about Dr. Sawyer? Apparently, his wife left him for another man. No. Really? He always seemed so put together. Well, that's not all. I heard she's been calling the hospital, telling anyone who'll listen that he's unstable. Says he's not fit to operate. God, that's awful. Do you think there's any truth to it? I froze, my hand halfway to the light box. Layla, who had been studying a set of scans, looked up sharply. Ethan, she said softly, are you okay? I forced a nod, trying to shake off the sting of the nurse's words. I'm fine. It's nothing I didn't expect. Layla's eyes narrowed. Allison's been spreading rumors, hasn't she? That's what the board meeting was really about. I sighed, suddenly feeling every one of my 40 years. She's angry, lashing out the only way she knows how. By trying to destroy your career? Layla's voice was thick with indignation. That's beyond angry, Ethan. That's malicious. I turned back to the scans, needing to focus on something, anything, other than Allison's betrayal. It doesn't matter. The board gave us the go-ahead. That's all that matters now. Layla was quiet for a moment, then said softly, when I first started working with you, I was terrified. Your reputation preceded you, brilliant, but demanding, uncompromising. But now, Ethan, you're one of the strongest people I know. Don't let her take that from you. Her words hit me like a physical blow, breaking through the walls I'd built around my emotions. I gripped the edge of the table, my knuckles turning white. I won't, I said, my voice rough. I can't. Sarah's counting on us. Layla nodded, a fierce determination in her eyes. Then let's make sure we give her our best. Show everyone what you're really capable of. We dove back into our work with renewed vigor. As the days passed, I could feel the excitement building in the hospital. Word had spread about the unprecedented surgery we were attempting, and the eyes of the entire medical community seemed to be on us. The morning of the surgery dawned bright and clear. As I scrubbed in, I felt a calm settle over me. This was where I belonged, where I could make a real difference. Allison, Ryan, the gossip and doubts, none of it mattered here. Layla joined me at the sink, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. Ready to make history, Dr. Sawyer? I nodded, a small smile tugging at my lips. Let's do this. As we entered the operating room, a hush fell over the assembled team. I could feel their eyes on me, some curious, some doubting, some hopeful. I took a deep breath, centering myself. All right, everyone, I said, my voice clear and confident. We've prepared for this. We know what we're doing. Let's give Sarah the future she deserves. With that, I stepped up to the table, held out my hand, and said the words that had defined my life for so long. Scalpel, please. As the first incision was made, everything else faded away. There was only the patient, the challenge, and the knowledge that I was exactly where I needed to be. Whatever Allison had taken from me, she couldn't take this. This was who I was at my core. Dr. Ethan Sawyer, neurosurgeon. And I was about to prove to everyone, including myself, just what that meant. The operating room fell silent as I made the final suture. I stepped back, my eyes fixed on the monitors displaying Sarah's vital signs. They remained steady, a testament to the success of the procedure we just completed. Time, I asked, my voice cutting through the tension. 11 hours and 43 minutes, Dr. Sawyer, one of the nurses replied. I nodded, allowing myself a small smile behind my surgical mask. Excellent work, everyone. Let's close up and move her to recovery. As we began the post-op procedures, I caught Layla's eye across the table. The relief and admiration in her gaze were evident. We'd done it. We'd pulled off a surgery that most had deemed impossible. Hours later, after ensuring Sarah was stable and on the path to recovery, I finally left the hospital. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, a stark contrast to the sterile environment I'd been in for nearly 24 hours straight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out to find a flood of messages and missed calls. News of the surgery's success had spread like wildfire. Dr. Sawyer, a voice called out. I turned to see a small group of reporters approaching, cameras at the ready. Can you comment on the groundbreaking surgery you performed today? I hesitated for a moment, then straightened my shoulders. This was my chance to silence the doubters once and for all. The procedure was a success, I stated, my voice clear and confident. We've proven that with innovative techniques and a dedicated team, even the most complex neurological conditions can be treated. Sarah has a long recovery ahead, but we're optimistic about her prognosis. Questions came rapid fire after that. I answered them succinctly, emphasizing the collaborative effort of my team and the potential impact of this new surgical approach. As I spoke, I could feel the weight of the past few weeks lifting. This was who I was, what I was meant to do. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of press conferences, interviews, and meetings with a hospital board. Sarah's family, overcome with gratitude, shared their story with local media, further fueling the public's fascination with the miracle surgeon. It was after one such interview that I saw her. Allison, standing in the hospital lobby, her eyes locked on me. She looked different somehow. Smaller, less polished than I remembered. "Ethan," she called out, her voice a mixture of hope and desperation. "Can we talk? Please." I felt a cold fury rise within me, but I kept my expression neutral as I approached her. "What are you doing here, Allison?" She reached out as if to touch my arm, but I stepped back, maintaining my distance. Her hand fell limply to her side. "I've left Ryan," she said, her eyes pleading. "I made a terrible mistake, Ethan. I see that now. What we had, it was real. I want to make things right." I studied her face, searching for any hint of the woman I'd once loved. All I saw was calculation and self-interest. "Make things right?" I repeated, my voice low and controlled. "You mean now that I'm back in the spotlight? Now that my career is soaring while yours? Well, I can only imagine how your little stunt has affected your job prospects." Allison's eyes widened. "No, Ethan, it's not like that. I truly regret what I did. We can start over, rebuild what we had." I laughed, the sound harsh and bitter. "What we had? We had nothing, Allison. It was all a lie, remember? Your words, not mine." "I didn't mean that," she protested weakly. I was angry, confused. "No," I cut her off. "You were honest. For once in our marriage, you told the truth. And now I'm telling you the truth. We're done, Allison. There's no going back, no starting over. You made your choice, and I've made mine." I turned to walk away, but her voice stopped me. "You'll regret this, Ethan. You need me. You've always needed me." I looked back at her, my gaze cold. "No, Allison. I don't need you. I never did. And that's what really bothers you, isn't it? That I can't succeed without you. That I'm better off without you." Without waiting for a response, I strode away, leaving her standing alone in the lobby. As I walked, I felt a sense of liberation. Allison no longer had any power over me. The next morning, I arrived at the hospital to find James waiting for me, his expression grim. "We've got a problem," he said without preamble. "Ryan's on the warpath." I raised an eyebrow. "What's he done now?" James handed me a printout. It was an email from a prominent medical journal, questioning the ethics of my new surgical technique. "He's contacted several journals, claiming your method is untested and dangerous. He's demanding an investigation into your practices." I scanned the email, a cold anger settling in my gut. "He's desperate," I said, my voice steady. "His leverage is gone, so he's lashing out." "What do you want to do?" James asked. I straightened, squaring my shoulders. "We fight back. Gather the team. We're going to present our case so thoroughly, so irrefutably, that no one will dare question our methods again." Over the next few days, we worked tirelessly, compiling data, preparing presentations, and reaching out to colleagues for support. Layla proved invaluable, her attention to detail catching potential weak points in our argument before our detractors could exploit them. When the day came to defend our work, I stood before a panel of medical experts, my voice unwavering as I presented our case. "Gentlemen, ladies," I began, "what we've developed here isn't just a new technique. It's a paradigm shift in how we approach complex neurological cases." For hours, I fielded questions, explained our methodology, and presented case studies. By the end, even the most skeptical panel members seemed impressed. As we left the hearing, Layla squeezed my arm. "You did it, Ethan. They're convinced." I nodded, allowing myself a small smile. "We did it," I corrected her. "I couldn't have done this without you and James." But as we celebrated our victory, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Ryan's attack had been repelled, but at what cost? The constant stress, the need to be always on guard, was starting to take its toll. That night, as I left the hospital, I felt the weight of the past few weeks pressing down on me. But I refused to break. I was Dr. Ethan Sawyer, and I would not let anyone, not Allison, not Ryan, destroy what I'd built. The parking lot was nearly empty as I made my way to my car, the late hour ensuring privacy. Or so I thought. Dr. Sawyer, a woman's voice called out, startling me. I turned to see a figure emerging from the shadows. She was petite, with dark hair and wary eyes. I'm sorry to approach you like this, but I need to talk to you. It's about Ryan. I tensed, my hand instinctively reaching for my phone. Who are you? She took a step closer, her hands raised in a placating gesture. My name is Megan. I'm Ryan's ex-girlfriend, and I have information you need to hear. I studied her face, looking for any sign of deception. Finding none, I nodded towards a nearby bench. Talk. Megan sat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. What Ryan did to you. It wasn't just about Allison. It's part of a game he plays, a sick experiment he's been running for years. I felt my blood run cold. What are you talking about? Ryan's a neuroscientist. Megan explained, her voice low and urgent. He's been conducting unofficial, highly unethical experiments on high-achieving individuals. He studies the effects of betrayal and emotional manipulation on their performance. I shook my head, disbelief warring with a growing sense of horror. That's insane. Why would he do that? Megan's laugh was bitter. Because he can. Because he gets off on playing God, on proving he can break even the strongest minds. And Allison? I asked, dreading the answer. A willing participant, Megan confirmed. She's not his first assistant, and she won't be his last. I stood abruptly, pacing in front of the bench. It's too much. Do you have any proof? Megan pulled out a small recorder. I was his accomplice once, she admitted. I'm not proud of it, but it means I have evidence. Listen. She pressed play, and Ryan's voice filled the night air. Subject ES is responding as predicted. The combination of personal and professional attacks seems to be wearing him down. I anticipate a breakdown within the next month. I felt my hands clench into fists. Turn it off, I growled. Megan complied, watching me warily. What are you going to do? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think rationally. Why are you telling me this? Why now? Because I want to stop him, Megan said simply. And you're the first person who might actually be able to do it. I studied her, weighing my options. If what she was saying was true, it changed everything. But could I trust her? I need time to think, I said finally. This is a lot to process. Megan nodded, standing up. I understand. But please, Dr. Sawyer, be careful. Ryan won't stop until he's destroyed you completely. As I watched her walk away, my mind raced with the implications of what I'd learned. If Ryan was truly behind everything, then exposing him could vindicate me completely. But it could also destroy my career if handled poorly. I spent the next few days in a state of hypervigilance, analyzing every interaction, every piece of information that crossed my path. I reached out to Megan, verifying her story and gathering more evidence. The picture that emerged was chilling. Finally, I made my decision. I wouldn't confront Ryan directly, not yet. I needed more proof, more leverage. And to get that, I needed to play his game, but on my terms. I called Megan, arranging to meet her in a quiet cafe across town. As we sat down, I leaned in, my voice low and determined. I want to build a case against Ryan. Something so airtight he can't wriggle out of it. Are you with me? Megan's eyes lit up with a mixture of relief and determination. Absolutely. Where do we start? We gather evidence, I said, my mind already plotting our next moves. We find his other victims, we document everything. And then, when the time is right, we bring him down. As we began to plan, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Ryan thought he could break me, but he'd only made me stronger. And now I had the ultimate motivation, justice. The following weeks were a delicate balancing act. By day, I was Dr. Ethan Sawyer, brilliant neurosurgeon, focused solely on my patients and my work. But in the shadows, I was a man on a mission, piecing together the extent of Ryan's manipulation. It started with small things. A nurse who seemed overly interested in my schedule. A colleague who asked probing questions about my personal life. Slowly, I began to see the web Ryan had woven around me. Someone at the hospital is feeding him information, I told James one evening as we shared a drink in my office. But I can't figure out who. James frowned, swirling the whiskey in his glass. You sure you're not being paranoid, Ethan? After everything that's happened, I shook my head, cutting him off. "Oh, I'm sure, and I'm going to prove it." The next day, I began my counteroffensive. I fed slightly different versions of my plans to different colleagues, watching to see which ones made their way back to Ryan. I varied my routine, took different routes home, always on guard. To the outside world, I'm sure I looked erratic. I caught worried glances from the hospital staff, whispered conversations that stopped when I entered a room. But I couldn't let it bother me. I was getting close. I could feel it. It was Layla who finally broached the subject. "Ethan," she said one day, cornering me in my office, "people are worried about you. The board, they're starting to question your stability again." I looked at her, searching her face for any sign of duplicity. Could she be the mole? "Are they now?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. "And what do you think, Layla?" She hesitated, and in that moment I saw something flicker in her eyes. Guilt? Fear? "I think," she said carefully, "that you've been under a lot of stress. Maybe it would be good to talk to someone. Professionally, I mean." I leaned back in my chair, considering my options. This could be a trap, an attempt to discredit me. Or it could be an opportunity. You know what? Maybe you're right. Layla blinked, clearly surprised by my acquiescence. "Really? I mean, that's great, Ethan. I can recommend someone if you'd like." I waved her off. "No need. I'll set something up myself. Thank you for your concern, Layla. It means a lot." As she left my office, I allowed myself a smile. The pieces were falling into place. The psychological evaluation was a calculated risk. I knew that if I played it right, it could be the final piece of evidence I needed. I spent hours preparing, carefully crafting my responses to document the stress and manipulation I'd been under without appearing unstable. Dr. Amelia Carter, the psychologist assigned to my case, was sharp. Her questions were probing, designed to uncover any cracks in my facade. But I was ready. "You've been through a lot in the past few months, Dr. Sawyer," she said, her pen poised over her notepad. "How have you been coping?" I met her gaze steadily. "It's been challenging," I admitted. The betrayal, the professional attacks. There were moments when I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Dr. Carter nodded encouragingly. "That's a normal reaction to extreme stress. Can you elaborate on that feeling?" I leaned forward, my voice low and intense. It was like someone was orchestrating everything. Every setback, every attack, it all felt too coordinated to be coincidence. I started to question everything, everyone around me. "And now," she asked, "how do you feel now?" I sat back, allowing a small smile to play on my lips. "Now, I feel clear, focused. I've realized that dwelling on the past, on the betrayals, it doesn't serve me. My work, my patience, that's what matters." By the end of the session, I could see the shift in Dr. Carter's demeanor. She was impressed, maybe even a little awed by my resilience. As I left her office, I felt a surge of triumph. I had laid the groundwork perfectly. Now it was time for the final act. I found Layla in the lab, poring over some test results. "Can we talk?" I asked, gesturing towards an empty conference room. She followed me, her expression curious. "Is everything okay, Ethan?" I closed the door behind us, then turned to face her. "That depends, Layla, on whether you're ready to tell me the truth." Her face paled. "What do you mean?" I pulled out my phone, setting it on the table between us. "I know, Layla. I know you've been working with Ryan." What I don't know is why. For a moment, she looked like she might deny it. Then her shoulders slumped. "How did you find out?" "It doesn't matter," I said, my voice hard. "What matters is what happens next. Start talking, Layla, and don't leave anything out." As Layla began to speak, her voice shaking, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger at her betrayal, yes, but also a satisfaction. The trap had been sprung, and now, finally, I had the upper hand. Ryan's downfall was within reach, and I intended to savor every moment of it. I stood in the empty conference room, my heart pounding with anticipation. The stage was set, the players were about to arrive, and I was ready to end this twisted game once and for all. The door opened, and Layla entered first, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Ryan followed, his usual smug expression firmly in place. Allison came last, looking confused and slightly annoyed. "Thank you all for coming," I said, my voice steady and controlled. "I believe we have some urgent matters to discuss." Ryan raised an eyebrow. I was under the impression this was about a complex case, Ethan. "What's she doing here?" He jerked his head towards Allison. I smiled, cold and predatory. "Oh, this is a complex case, Ryan. Just not the kind you're expecting." With deliberate slowness, I pulled out a file and laid it on the table. "You see, I've been doing some research of my own lately about betrayal, manipulation, and the effects they have on high-achieving individuals." Sound familiar? The color drained from Ryan's face, while Layla let out a small gasp. Allison looked between us, confusion giving way to dawning horror. "I don't know what you're talking about," Ryan said, but his voice lacked its usual confidence. I ignored him, turning instead to Layla. "Why don't you start, Layla? Tell them what you told me." Layla's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. Hey, Ryan threatened to ruin my career if I didn't help him. I didn't know how far it would go." "What is she talking about?" Allison demanded, her voice shrill. "Ryan, what have you done?" I pulled out a recorder identical to the one Megan had shown me. "Allow me to illuminate the situation." I pressed play, and Ryan's voice filled the room, detailing his experiment in clinical, detached tones. As the recording played, I watched the reactions around the room. Allison's face crumpled in disbelief and disgust. Layla stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. But it was Ryan's reaction that interested me most. His expression cycled through shock, anger, and finally, a sort of perverse pride. When the recording ended, Ryan slow clapped, his lips curled in a sneer. "Bravo, Ethan. I must say, I'm impressed. You've played the game better than I anticipated." "This wasn't a game, Ryan," I spat. "These are people's lives you've been toying with. Their careers, their relationships, their mental health." Ryan waved a dismissive hand. "Please, it was all in the name of science. Do you have any idea how valuable this research could be? Understanding the breaking points of top performers, the limits of human resilience." "You're insane," Allison whispered, backing away from him. "I can't believe I fell for your lies, that I helped you do this to Ethan." "Oh, don't act so innocent, Allison," Ryan sneered. "You were a more than willing participant. The thrill of the deception, the power it gave you, you loved every minute of it." I slammed my hand on the table, silencing them both. "Enough. It's over, Ryan. I have more than enough evidence to end both your careers. The ethics board will have a field day with this." Ryan's face contorted with rage. He lunged towards me, but suddenly stopped short, his hand flying to his head. What's happening?" he gasped before crumpling to the floor, his body racked with convulsions. Despite everything, my medical training kicked in. I rushed to his side, barking orders at Layla. "Call for a crash cart now. And give me a pen light." As I worked to stabilize Ryan, a fragment of memory surfaced. His original scans, the ones I'd used to diagnose his inoperable tumor years ago. There had been something off about them, something I dismissed at the time. With a jolt of realization, I understood. I hadn't saved Ryan's life all those years ago. I'd misdiagnosed him, performed an unnecessary surgery, and now that mistake was coming back to haunt us both. As the emergency team rushed in, I stepped back, my mind reeling. The tangled web of deception, betrayal, and unintended consequences stretched out before me, more complex than I'd ever imagined. The next few weeks passed in a blur of meetings, hearings, and press conferences. I presented my findings to the hospital board and a medical ethics committee, laying out the full extent of Ryan and Layla's unethical behavior. The committee sat in stunned silence as I detailed the breadth of Ryan's experiment and the manipulation tactics he'd employed. When I finished, Dr. Harrison, the head of the ethics committee, leaned forward. "Dr. Sawyer, these allegations are disturbing, to say the least. What you propose is a course of action." I met his gaze steadily. Ryan and Layla's actions represent a gross violation of medical ethics and human decency. They should face the harshest possible consequences. Revocation of their medical licenses, at minimum. The fallout was swift and severe. Ryan and Layla were stripped of their credentials, their careers in medicine effectively over. As for Allison, while she escaped professional repercussions, the personal toll was evident. She approached me one day as I was leaving the hospital, her eyes red-rimmed and pleading. "Ethan, please, can we talk? I know I made a terrible mistake, but if you just let me explain." I cut her off, my voice cold. "There's nothing to explain, Allison. You made your choices. You chose to betray me, to actively participate in Ryan's sick games. There's no coming back from that. But I love you," she whispered, reaching for my hand. I stepped back, out of her reach. "No, you don't. You love what I represent: stability, success, status. You never loved me, Allison. And I don't love you. Not anymore." I walked away, leaving her sobbing on the sidewalk. I felt no satisfaction in her pain, but no regret either. She had made her bed, and now she had to lie in it. The media circus that followed was intense. Reporters camped outside the hospital, clamoring for interviews and statements. But rather than damaging my reputation, the story painted me as a victim who had fought back against corruption in the medical community. I used the attention to shed light on the broader issues at play. In one particularly memorable interview, I addressed the camera directly. What happened to me, what Ryan did, it's not an isolated incident. There are people out there using their positions of power and trust to manipulate others for their own gain. It has to stop. And it stops with all of us refusing to be silent, refusing to be victims. In the wake of the scandal, I found myself with an unexpected platform. I established the Sawyer Foundation, dedicated to supporting victims of psychological abuse and promoting ethical practices in the medical field. But there was one final piece of unfinished business. The misdiagnosis of Ryan's original tumor weighed heavily on my conscience. I spent weeks reviewing the case, consulting with colleagues, and finally, I published a comprehensive paper detailing the misdiagnosis and its implications. The paper sent shockwaves through the neurosurgical community. Dr. Carter, my mentor and the head of neurosurgery, called me into his office after its publication. "This couldn't have been easy, Ethan," he said, gesturing to the paper on his desk. "Admitting to a mistake of this magnitude, many surgeons would have buried it." I met his gaze squarely. It was the right thing to do. If we can improve our diagnostic procedures, prevent this from happening to someone else, then some good can come from this whole mess. Dr. Carter nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "You're a credit to the profession, Ethan. I hope you know that." As I left his office, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely again. 6 months later, I stood backstage at the International Neurosurgery Conference, adjusting my tie as I waited to be introduced. The divorce was finalized. My life was my own again, and tonight, I was being honored for my contributions to the field. As I heard my name announced, I took a deep breath and stepped out onto the stage. The applause was thunderous, a far cry from the whispers and sidelong glances I'd endured just months ago. I approached the podium, looking out over the sea of faces. Colleagues, rivals, up-and-coming surgeons, I took them all in before beginning my speech. "Thank you for this honor," I began. "The past year has been challenging, to say the least. I've experienced betrayal, manipulation, and ethical dilemmas that I never could have imagined when I first took the Hippocratic Oath." I paused, letting my words sink in. "But I stand before you today, not as a victim, but as a survivor. More than that, as someone who refused to let adversity define him." I spoke about the importance of integrity, both personal and professional. About the responsibility we all shared to uphold the highest ethical standards, even when no one was watching, especially then. In the end, I concluded, our legacy isn't measured in accolades or published papers. It's measured in the lives we touch, the positive changes we effect, and the standards we uphold. Let us all strive to be worthy of the trust our patients place in us. As I left the stage to another round of applause, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life that had begun with Allison's betrayal was finally ending. I made my way through the crowd, accepting congratulations and well wishes, when a voice caught my attention. Impressive speech, Dr. Sawyer. Especially the part about ethical standards. I turned to find myself face to face with a woman I recognized immediately, Dr. Sophia Reyes, one of the most respected neuroscientists in the field. Her work on neuroplasticity had revolutionized our understanding of brain recovery. Dr. Reyes, I said, extending my hand. It's an honor to meet you. I'm a great admirer of your work. She shook my hand, her grip firm and confident. Likewise, Dr. Sawyer. In fact, I was hoping we might discuss the possibility of collaboration. Your recent paper on improving diagnostic procedures for brain tumors. I think it could dovetail nicely with some of my current research. I felt a spark of excitement, the kind I hadn't experienced in far too long. I'd be very interested in hearing more about that, Dr. Reyes. She smiled, a glint of something more than professional interest in her eyes. Excellent. Perhaps we could discuss it over dinner? I know a great restaurant not far from here. I found myself smiling back, genuinely intrigued by both the professional and personal possibilities. I'd like that very much. As we walked out of the conference center together, the future stretched out before me, full of new challenges and opportunities. I had survived the darkest period of my life, emerging stronger and wiser. Whatever came next, I was ready to face it head on. The cool night air hit my face as we stepped outside, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly alive. The game was over, the reckoning complete. Now it was time to write the next chapter on my own terms. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.